The Last Supper has been reanalyzed by AI. The result shocked the entire world. There is a painting in Milan that is, by the numbers, mostly gone. What you see when you look at Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper today is not what Leonardo painted. Most of it flaked off the walls centuries ago. And yet in the last few years, artificial intelligence has been pointed at the surviving fragments of that ruin, and it has genuinely changed what we understand about the most famous meal in history. Not through some secret spiral of hidden words. Not through a code nobody can verify. Through something quieter, stranger, and far more real. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand why the true story is actually the one worth being shocked by, and why so many people online have been fed a fake one instead. Let's start with the wall itself, because almost nobody talks about how reckless the original decision was. When Leonardo was commissioned to paint the Last Supper on the dining hall wall of the convent of Santa Maria del Grazie around 1495, the standard technique for wall paintings was true fresco. You mix pigment with wet plaster, and as the plaster dries, the color becomes chemically part of the wall. It's fast, it's permanent, and it has kept ceilings and chapels intact for 600 years. But true fresco demands speed. You paint a patch, it dries, it's locked in, you move to the next patch. There's no going back to soften a shadow or rework an expression once the plaster sets. And that was never going to work for Leonardo. His entire reputation was built on the opposite instinct, on returning to a face again and again, blending edges so gradually that you can't find the line where light becomes shadow, the technique historians call sfumato. So he refused fresco. He sealed the wall with a dry ground and painted on top of it in tempera, the way he'd paint on a wood panel, layer by patient layer, for as long as he wanted. It was a brilliant decision for the art and a disaster for its survival, because the paint never bonded to the stone. It just sat there, physically resting on the surface, and it began peeling within Leonardo's own lifetime. Visitors were describing flaking paint as early as the 1500s. From there, the damage just compounds. In 1652, someone literally cut a doorway through the bottom of the wall, slicing off the feet of the central figure to make room for a new entrance to the kitchen. In 1796, soldiers under Napoleon were quartered in that same dining hall, and multiple historical accounts described the room being used in ways that damaged the mural further, including targeting the surface itself. Then, in 1943, an Allied bombing raid during World War II hit the monastery directly. The wall holding the Last Supper survived because it had been reinforced with sandbags, but the roof above it was destroyed, and the painting was left partially exposed to open air, humidity, and temperature swings for roughly 3 years before it could be properly protected again. By the time conservators seriously reckoned with what was left in the 20th century, the estimate most art historians now accept is that somewhere between 20 and 30% of what you're looking at is Leonardo's actual original paint. The rest is loss, and centuries of other people's hands trying to patch it. That's the part that should already stop you. We built an entire 500-year mythology, Dan Brown novels, documentaries, conspiracy forums arguing about hand gestures and hidden chalices, around an image that is mostly restoration and guesswork layered onto scraps of the original. The most scrutinized painting on Earth is also one of the most fragmentary. And that fact alone is what set off a genuinely major restoration effort. Between 1978 and 1999, a team led by conservator Pinin Brambilla Barcelon undertook a 21-year restoration, not to make the painting beautiful again, but to carefully strip away centuries of overpainting by well-meaning but unqualified restorers and get back down to whatever fragments of Leonardo's actual hand still clung to the plaster. It was less an act of beautification than an act of archaeology. And it's this restored, fragile, heavily documented surface that modern researchers, including now AI systems, have started returning to with tools nobody had access to 20 years ago. So here's where the AI part actually begins, and here's where I want to be very careful with you, because this is exactly the point where a lot of YouTube videos start making things up. In the past couple of years, you've probably seen thumbnails claiming an AI decoded secret messages in the Last Supper, hidden words spelling out things like truth and betrayal, spiraling out from the center of the table in the shape of the golden ratio, or claims that an AI unmasked a hidden woman and child buried in the brushwork, hinting at bloodlines and forbidden secrets. These stories spread fast because they're built to spread fast. They borrow real, true details, Leonardo's mirror writing, his obsession with proportion, the genuinely unresolved debate about the figure to Christ's right, and they staple invented AI findings onto them that no museum, no peer-reviewed paper, and no named conservation lab has ever actually published. When you go looking for the source, there isn't one. There's just another video or article making the same claim, citing the previous video or article. It's a closed loop of nothing. That matters, because the real research is genuinely interesting enough that it doesn't need to be exaggerated into a conspiracy. Let's talk about what's actually happening. The first real tool worth understanding is hyperspectral imaging. A normal camera, and your own eyes, register light in 3 broad channels: red, green, blue, and blend them into the colors you perceive. A hyperspectral camera does something completely different. It captures the same surface across hundreds of narrow wavelength bands, reaching well past what human vision can register into the near-infrared and ultraviolet. Applied to a damaged wall like the Last Supper, this means a patch of plaster that looks to your eye like a uniform gray smear of decay can, at one specific wavelength, reveal that the pigment underneath behaves differently from the surrounding material, evidence that something was once painted, drawn, or altered there that the visible surface no longer shows. This isn't speculative technology. It's an established, published method used across art conservation, from Renaissance panels to old master drawings, and it has been applied in serious documentation projects around the Last Supper's surviving fragments. The second tool is infrared reflectography, and this one is almost poetic in what it does. Infrared light passes through the upper layers of paint as if they were faintly translucent, and bounces back off the layer underneath, the underdrawing, the sketch an artist puts down before ever touching color. With this technique, conservators can see the ghost of Leonardo's first decisions: a hand he repositioned, an arm he moved a few inches, a face he reworked before committing to it in paint. Crucially, this underdrawing sometimes survives in places where the paint above it has completely crumbled away, because the drawing was shielded by the very layers that were later lost. This is where AI genuinely earns its place in the story, because a human conservator can compare 2 or 3 of these scans by eye, but they cannot hold hundreds of overlapping wavelength images in their head at once, and reliably spot which faint variations are meaningful signal, and which are just noise from 5 centuries of plaster degradation. That is a pattern recognition problem, and pattern recognition at scale is exactly what modern machine learning is good at. Researchers have trained models on Leonardo's confirmed body of work, his notebooks, his verified drawings, his known compositional habits, so that when those models are pointed at the scan data from a damaged surface, they can flag which faint marks are statistically consistent with the way Leonardo actually drew, and which are just artifacts of decay. That's a real, documented, and frankly less romantic use of AI than decoding a secret spiral, but it's also the one that's actually defensible, and it's already producing results. Clearer underdrawings, better maps of where original paint survives versus where later restorers filled in gaps, and more confidence about which parts of the composition we can trust as authentically Leonardo's. There's a second, separate strand of real AI work happening around this painting, and it has nothing to do with hidden messages. It's about digital reconstruction. Because so much of the visible surface is loss and later repainting, some conservation and digital heritage teams have used machine learning models trained on Leonardo's other confirmed paintings and drawings to generate probability-based reconstructions of what damaged sections likely looked like originally. This is not the AI inventing new content and presenting it as historical fact. Responsible versions of this work are always labeled clearly as a hypothesis, a visualization, a best statistical guess constrained by everything we know about Leonardo's technique, his palette, and his anatomical precision. It's the same category of tool being used right now to reconstruct damaged frescoes in Pompeii, torn manuscripts, and degraded photographs. Take the surviving fragments, train a model on a large body of stylistically consistent work, and generate a plausible fill for the gaps, always flagged as reconstruction rather than discovery. And then there's a third area, which is maybe the least flashy, but the most quietly important: attribution and technique analysis. Art historians have used computational tools to study brushstroke patterns, pigment composition, and compositional geometry across Leonardo's confirmed works, comparing them to disputed or uncertain pieces to help settle authorship questions. This kind of analysis has been part of real, published scholarship around several Leonardo-attributed works over the past decade, and the methods keep improving as the models get better at picking up on subtle, consistent habits in an artist's hand, the angle he tends to favor in a crosshatch, the specific curve he draws for a knuckle, the proportions he returns to again and again. None of this requires a secret code. Leonardo's actual, real, well-documented obsession with proportion, the golden ratio, the mathematics of anatomy, the mechanics of drapery and light, is already fascinating on its own. You don't need to invent a hidden spiral of words to make that man interesting. He filled somewhere between 13 and 20,000 surviving pages with notes and sketches on flight, anatomy, hydraulics, and optics, written in his own backward mirror script, most likely because he was left-handed and it kept the wet ink from smudging under his hand as he wrote. Though some historians also note it had the side effect of making his notes harder for a casual reader to glance at and understand. He was illegitimate, self-taught, excluded from the formal Latin education that would have opened doors to law or the priesthood, and he turned that exclusion into a method. He trusted direct observation of the world over inherited authority, and that habit of watching closely, second-guessing appearances, and refusing to accept things at face value runs through everything he made, including, quite plausibly, the compositional choices in The Last Supper itself. So, why does the fake version of this story keep spreading? Partly because AI decoded a hidden 500-year-old secret message is simply a better headline than AI helped researchers slightly improve confidence in which brushstrokes are original. The real story is incremental. It's careful. It comes with footnotes and margins of error. The fake story is clean, dramatic, and built for a thumbnail. But I'd argue the real story is actually more unsettling once you sit with it, because it forces you to confront something true. The most reproduced, most argued over image in art history is a painting we've mostly lost, patched together from a handful of surviving fragments and centuries of informed guessing, and the tools we now have to examine those fragments are good enough to start separating fact from restoration. But they are not, and were never designed to be, a device for extracting secret prophecy from a wall. That distinction matters beyond just this one painting, because the pattern repeats constantly online right now. Anytime a piece of content tells you an AI decoded, unlocked, or revealed a hidden secret in a historical artifact, whether it's a pyramid, a shipwreck, an old manuscript, or a masterpiece, the responsible move is the same. Ask who did the research, ask where it was published, and ask whether anyone outside the video description can actually verify it. Real conservation science is slow, peer-reviewed, and usually published in academic journals or museum technical bulletins, not dropped first into a dramatic voiceover with ominous music. If a claim can't survive that basic check, it's not a discovery. It's content. None of this means AI has nothing left to teach us about The Last Supper. If anything, the honest version of this story is still unfolding, and it's arguably more exciting precisely because it's real. Multispectral scanning technology keeps improving. The models being trained on Leonardo's confirmed body of work keep getting more sophisticated at recognizing his specific technique. Every few years, conservation teams get a slightly sharper picture of exactly how much of that wall is truly his, and exactly what his underdrawing tells us about how he built the composition, which figure he adjusted, which gesture he reworked, how he used geometry to guide the eye toward the center of the table. That's not a spiral of secret text. It's something better. It's the actual working mind of the most curious person who ever lived, becoming a little more visible after 500 years of decay, one careful, verifiable scan at a time. So here's the honest ending to this story, and I think it's more interesting than the fake one. We didn't need artificial intelligence to invent a mystery inside The Last Supper. The real mystery was already there, built into the physical object itself, a masterpiece that started dying the moment it was finished, that survived a doorway cut through its center, soldiers, a bombing raid, and centuries of well-meaning but damaging restoration, and that we can now examine with more precision than any human eye in history has ever had access to. What AI is actually doing is not decoding a hidden prophecy. It's helping us see, more clearly than we ever could before, Exactly how much of what we've been staring at for 500 years was never really there to begin with, and how much of the man himself, his choices, his corrections, his restless need to observe rather than assume, is still quietly present in the fragments that survived. So here's the question I actually want to leave you with. Not whether Leonardo hid a secret code in the plaster. He didn't, and no credible research says he did. But this: knowing that 70 to 80% of the most famous painting in the world is gone, replaced by other people's guesses, does that change how you look at it? Does a ruin that's been this carefully studied, this heavily reconstructed, still deserve to be called Leonardo's masterpiece? Or is it now something else entirely, something closer to a 500-year conversation between him and everyone who's tried to save what he left behind? Tell me what you think in the comments. And tell me which real piece of art history you'd want AI pointed at next, because I promise you, the true stories are still stranger than the fake ones.